Call the city council work session to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Vining. Here. Germaine. Here. Lamore.
Here.
Felder.
Here.
Whitman. Here. Echoangeli.
Excuse.
Mayor Clark.
Here. So, Mr. Pastu, we have some items on the agenda, but I think you might want to speak to those.
In light of the fact that we have a special meeting at the conclusion of this work session, the first two items, review of the council goals and objectives, as well as discussion regarding neighborhood services, I would like us to have those at a future work session. I do want to talk about the review of items on the regular meeting. If I could have Mr. Lewis. I've got the three items on tonight that he has. One is, let's go with the first one being the lights that were discussed at the last meeting regarding the Labor Park project.
Very good. Mr. Lewis.
We were having a little technical difficulties getting my USB to work, so fortunately I had printed out for the council members all 4 photographs I took of the existing Washington Post lights. At the meeting 2 weeks ago, we had some competing agreements on there because we were still working to finalize the lighting type and the costs associated with that. We did have some changes in that there was an error in all the agreements that talked about only 6 lights going back, when in fact we had 15. We were able, the architect and I looked at 3 locations that looked kind of out of place, so we did actually pare that down to 12. One of them was right in front of the library door, for example. So we got the number of new lights down to 12. Everybody's comfortable that should be what we need to see there, and it doesn't leave any place unlit. Lights up all of our features. But what we did administratively, Mr. Pastu and I reviewed this along with our architect, and we really decided that we did like the Washington Post style that we do have on our 3 most recent enhancement projects that we've had. And those would be the Rouser Street Bridge, the Winchester Street Bridge, and the North Monroe Street streetscape. So what I gave you was a picture of the Washington Post light, and that is available as a special order material from DTE as part of the contract. I gave you the first picture is just the pole, as a whole. Second picture is a close-up of the base. Third one is a close-up of the globe, and then the last one just kind of shows the layout on the bridge there. Spacing in Labor Park is going to be similar to what you would see linearly on the bridge, although they're not in a straight line. So 12 posts in essentially under 1 block area should give us adequate lighting, especially because you've got some ambient lighting from the buildings themselves and from the street intersections, some of which will remain the overhead. So the incremental cost, I think, probably in the range of $5,000 to $8,000. I'd have to go back and look at the final numbers on that difference between what was going to be the standard stock and the special order material here for DTE. But we're very comfortable that these special order poles most closely resemble those that we have in other areas of the city, including the ones the city owns downtown. The only difference is we had a choice of green or black. We did choose black on this one because we have a number of other design features with offsetting colors. It's not like we're trying to match a multiple color palette of some of the enhancements at the park. So we felt like black was a better match for those. That way we didn't have any contrasting colors. So that's what we're looking at. That could be changed if we needed to up until the point of delivery, but that's what we picked for now. So the contract that's in front of you tonight would be a contract for special order materials. I think it's $50,000 and change, and that would be with DTE. We did approve, $50,685.70. Like every other agreement with them, we get a credit for 3 years worth of a lamp cost. In other words, what we will pay to them for operating, they offset that cost in the initial installation here. The thing about being a special order, this pricing includes 1 spare post and globe that we're required to stock at our DPS yard just in case we have a knockdown. And the good thing about using the Washington Post, though, is for future contracts and things like that, as we get this inventory built up, we may not have to always have a spare, because if they're more or less interchangeable, we can minimize the number of spare poles we have there. So that, I think, covers everything I wanted to say on this item.
Questions? Brian?
Yeah, I know that Councilman Echoangeli had questioned purchase versus lease on these prior. What are we doing here? Are we purchasing the lamp post, or are we leasing them from DTE? How's that working?
It's really neither. I think what he was questioning was whether we wanted to consider converting our entire lighting system, starting with this, but then eventually going with the rest of the city to our own ownership. This isn't really an ownership or a lease. It's an agreement to add poles, which they will then be responsible for, and then we will be charged the maintenance costs, including lighting and maintenance down the road. So it's kind of a perpetual. I wouldn't characterize it as a lease, but this is just kind of the way the agreements is set up, is that they're DTE poles, they're responsible for them. We pay charges based on the fixtures at a fixed rate every month in perpetuity. So we have like roughly 1,800 poles citywide, and our lighting bill is about $450,000 a year. And that's what we pay them for energy. If there's a bulb out, they have to replace it. If it's a knockdown, they have to replace it. Anything like that. It's basically one-stop shop. Councilman Michelangelo was questioning whether we would be better off to do it on our own, which we had done for the downtown system, about 180 poles, with the main reason, though, that we did that back in the 80s because DTE did not offer a decorative option. So the only way for us to get that was to do it ourselves. That's the only reason we went that path in the 80s. I'm not a terribly strong advocate of that just because of it is a wholesale change of the way we do business. Is it cheaper? We haven't done the analysis on that, but it would introduce an entirely different level of complexity. So if that's something we want to pursue as a policy, there's going to need to be a lot more study and analysis done in that before we would go that way. I wouldn't recommend doing it differently for just one site and starting to fracture that off to where we own a little bit here and a little bit there, because it becomes one of many things that we are challenged to chase down on a monthly basis.
And DTE takes care of the maintenance of all the poles?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why with it being a special order, if there was a knockdown where somebody drove into a pole, they don't necessarily have this in stock. That's why we are required to stock a spare of the pole and globe as part of our agreement.
So the 50,000 basically is that paying for the poles to be?
Yes. That's essentially the capital cost. It's essentially a capital cost agreement. But they give us credit for 3 years worth of lamp cost as sort of an incentive to, I don't know whether it's incentive or just an offset or just something they have done as company policy.
We pay after that though. What, after the 3 years is up?
The cost on there, you can extrapolate this down here. If you on page 6 of the agreement there, I don't know if you have it handy, but there's a computation of contribution in aid of construction, and then that's where that comes in. And essentially, that's where that comes in. That's they show 261.96 times 12, so the estimated total lamp charge is up in 5 is 3143.50. That's what they estimate the annual cost of the energy and maintenance for these lights to be. So, and that's pretty close when the numbers I just gave you we have roughly 1,800 poles, and we have our energy bill is roughly 450,000. That's close to a 3-to-1 or a 300-to-1 factor, and they show that as $261 per pole per year. So that's in the right range. It's consistent with everything else in the city.
I have a question.
Michelle?
If for some reason later on down the line we needed to interchange parts, would the globes fit the other lighting in the city?
I don't know that they would, not in the downtown area, not quite, because it's a different model. But everything we've done with DTE, the last 3 projects plus this one, they would be.
Okay.
So if somebody knocked down one on the Winchester Bridge, which I laughingly say would be more likely an airplane would hit it than somebody would actually be able to run off the road and hit one up on the upper rail, we could interchange those. So that's why I say after we do a certain number of projects with DTE and we have 4 or 5 of these in stock, we're not going to need to keep stocking special orders going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions?
If something happens to these poles, we're basically responsible. For instance, if they break, whatever. I mean, obviously we're going to have one in stock, but
No, DTE is responsible for the replacement, but they just
Okay.
want us to have one on hand in case we get a knockdown, then they can come and grab it from our store, so to speak, storehouse of material, and put it back up.
okay. Thank you.
I just have a quick question, Patrick, on the one layout shows the lines for the poles, locations on the lines. And I didn't get a chance on the weekend to drive through in the evening time, but would be the north side of the Opportunity Center.
Mhm.
Is there any lights that are affixed to the building or poles that go along? So they note this as a public alleyway. I know it is a kind of a drive. I, I don't recall, so that's why I'm asking. If you,
At least one light mid-block that is still going to remain on an overhead pole, because where we've got overhead utilities, I think the alley does have, Councilwoman Vining might know off the top of her head. Do
and
you
that's what I was
recall?
trying to recall. I didn't get back through there. It seems to be lit. I've walked it and never seemed to thought it was dark, so I just thought if you knew offhand, but I don't.
I don't know offhand, but I believe there's at least one in the alley, and I think there's all of the ones at the intersections of streets that are to remain are going to stay there.
Okay.
It's Second and East, or what is formerly Second, I mean, it will soon to be cease to exist as Second Street, and Eastchester. We've got there. I think it's coming down because there aren't any poles on the east side of Eastchester on the railroad side. But that's why we made sure to hit that area a little denser. But I think the alley's in good shape.
I seem to think it is. I just didn't see it might be something existing that wouldn't be on this, of course.
I think that's correct. But I'll check that out.
Okay. What do they do with the old poles they take away?
Well, they're their old wood poles, so we won't miss them.
Okay. I was thinking they might be one of these or something. All
Hopefully,
right.
they don't lay them down our terrace and leave
I
them
hope
there for
not.
6 months.
Yeah, well,
Like
I'll
they do
make-
with their
I'll
new
do a
stuff they
phone
drop
call
off,
again.
but-
So, other questions from comment or questions from council? Very good. Patrick? Mr. Festu, is there one on?
It'll actually be part of introducing an ordinance 20-002 regarding an amendment to the floodplain map. I'll have Mr. Lewis give you an overview of that as well.
Certainly. This is one we probably could have tried to project this on the screen, but it's hard toggling back and forth. So what I gave each one of you is an example of the change in flood maps. Actually, this is the area that we improved upon. I just want to caution everybody, so anytime you hear FEMA getting involved in issuing new flood maps, everybody goes crazy because obviously that has a major impact on residential property owners if there's a change in your flood hazard status. I'm pleased to report that this latest remapping, because it was only a remapping done for wave action, they were modeling waves on Lake Erie because previous mapping had not included that. It just included tributary flooding. So in other words, what happens to the River Raisin, Sandy Creek, Plum Creek, those other channels that as they contribute to river flooding. But it never had addressed the issues of wave action on Lake Erie. So they did modeling for the wave action on Lake Erie, and at the time they did that, fortunately, they asked the communities to provide additional data if we had any, if there was areas that they felt that we felt at the time needed to also be remapped. I believe John Emming, our port engineer, working in conjunction with Paul Lamars, provided them a lot of data for some of the port sites because there were areas shown in the port area, in Gerdau, a lot of land areas that were inundated in the 100-year event. And because there have been a number of berms and things that were built over the years, they reviewed the data and determined that, yes, some of those areas were no longer in the flood hazard area. So the two maps you have, the top one is the new map for the port area. The bottom one is the old map. And with the blue being the 100-year flood zone, and those would be areas that if there were residential properties would be required to carry flood insurance, and if they were industrial commercial, you could not build in those areas except under certain circumstances. And then the beige color on the old map is actually the 500-year, which does not require anything specifically actionable, but it does just show you where a higher event flood would affect. So when you flip these maps back and forth, you can see there's quite a bit of area that is now no longer in that 100-year or 1% annual chance flood. So we have to take action legally, regardless of why the maps changed and what properties they affected. We have to adopt an ordinance that then references the new panel numbers. Of the 10 panels, which are basically map sections that cover the city of Monroe in one form or another, 6 of them were revised. So the ordinance you have in front of you has the revised date of June 19th of 2020, whereas the 4 panels that were not affected retain the old date of October 2nd, 2014. So I believe it's as simple as that. I've done this a couple times since I've been here, having to revise the maps. It's the same process. They give us the sample ordinance. We adopted their sample ordinance last time, so we're very comfortable that all we have to do is adopt this and then send that to them for review, and that we will be in good standing. If we don't do anything, we could be suspended from the program, which again seems an unnecessary reason to not adopt maps that, in this particular case especially, are more favorable to the city than than the old maps were. So I think that's more or less the Cliff Notes version of it for now.
Any questions from council? But one thing for the council and others, these maps are available at the engineering office, and if there's a particular area you wish to look at currently or past, they are available.
Yep, come down and see us, and I believe FEMA even may have them online now.
Yeah, that's possible.
You can always look there too. But unless there's any concerns, I think I just wanted to call your attention to what we were doing and it's not as scary as the remapping sometimes is, but done for good reason in this particular case. One other point I'd make too is coming in with our discussion of 2 weeks ago, as I'd mentioned before, they don't map the effects of backwater through storm sewers. So again, the maps, as before, did not include the Bayview Glenwood area. They didn't then, they don't now, because their policies are still, they're not mapping backwaters from storm sewers. So.
Through our past discussions and with council and future considerations, we at least know those items to address internally, so.
Yep. So that's all I have, Your Honor,
Okay.
unless there's any other
Seeing no
questions.
questions,
there
Mr.
is-
Pastu?
There is one more, Your Honor. Just a brief overview of the professional service award for environmental testing at the Lazy Boy site. We have that on consent as well tonight.
I'll just,
Oops.
Touch
Oh,
on,
yes.
uh,
Andrew?
we had spoken about, in the water issues that the city's gonna face in the years to come, and the infrastructure that we're gonna have to construct to be able to deal with those issues. Do the new maps give you any additional insight and data on how we're gonna approach those problems, or perhaps some avenues that are more or less viable, per the discussion that we had 2 weeks ago?
give you one of my shortest answers ever. No.
That's very unfortunate. Thank you, Director.
You're very welcome. Sorry, I don't have anything more to add. They don't give us any insight into that.
Mr. Pastu or Mr. Lewis, the other item?
This one's relatively straightforward. Obviously, my staff lacks the professional certifications necessary to review as best remediation and clearance on hazardous materials and air quality. So we, as part of the Lazy Boy headquarters demolition, we need to engage a professional services consultant. And that consultant that's been working with us on this project is AKT Peerless. From Farmington. They're one of the leaders in the field, and we've been very comfortable with them. They gave us a proposal for all the items that would need to go with that in accordance with the terms of the EPA grant, and those are briefly environmental abatement. Air monitoring is the largest chunk of that. They figured, based on the contractor's estimate of 45 days, $36,000 in costs, and that's actually quite reasonable. It's under $1,000 a day for someone of that level. $10,000 for $10,300 for overhaul, project management, and supervision, because you've got that work product has to be monitored by others as well, quality control. Lab costs, 480 air samples at $12 a sample, $57.60, and then $5,600 in roughly reimbursables, and preparation of a final closeout report, which is required to say basically the site's clean. And that's a $10,000 expense. So we've found that at $68,460. We believe that's within the realm of reasonable. And we did ask for a small contingency on that as well, just because the contractor assumed 45 days, but we also know there's a number of ceilings built below other ceilings. And if we get into a little more extensive process here, we could be looking at a couple extra weeks. So we want to give a little cushion. We don't have to keep coming back to you, bogging up the agenda with change orders on something like that. So we're asking for authorization of up to $80,000 to execute this baseline agreement that right now is $68,460.
Questions for Patrick? Mr. Pastu, any other comments?
Your Honor,
on
those
this?
were the three things I wanted to go over on tonight's agenda. Two of them are on the consent. One of them, obviously, the ordinance, the introduction and scheduling a public hearing will be under council action. So with that, I have nothing else for the work session tonight.
So for the other two items that were originally posted on the work session, you'll bring them back at
Yes.
next or later work session for council to have discussions. I know the first one, we're looking for those draft goals and objectives so we can move forward on those as well. And then neighborhood services, I know this part of our discussion within the goals and objectives also. So we'll look forward to those conversations. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Andrew?
Regarding one of those items that was taken off the work session agenda, the goals and objectives session coming back. Is there any way that council could get an advance copy so that we could come to the next work session with comments prepared?
Yes, I'll have that for you. Yep.
Good idea.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
So if there's no further comments from the council, I'm going to close the work session. And we have a city council special meeting scheduled to start immediately afterwards. And I'm not seeing anybody needs to depart for a moment, but I'll open the city council special meeting. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Vining.
Here.
Lamore.
Here.
Felder.
Here.
Egley.
Excused?
Mayor Clark.
Here. So we have one item, Mr. Pastu, if you, or Mr. Buds, I guess if you need anything, or just need a motion? Motion. To go into closed executive session, need a motion.
Motion to go into closed executive session
For?
for the review of the attorney-client privileges.
No second.
Motion by Councilman Lamore, supported by Councilwoman Germaine, go into closed executive session for attorney-client privilege communication. Do we need a additional on that, or what that is?
We do not, Your Honor.
Okay. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Vining. Yes. Germaine.
Yes.
Lamore.
Yes.
Felder.
Yes.
Whitman. Yes. Mayor Clark.
Yes.